So have you ever thought about the sleep process? You ever thought about how a patient gets to your office as it is now? Until I went out into the sleep world and started delving into it, I had no idea. I knew that a patient came to my office and I could do an oral appliance on them. But I had no clue how a patient got to me. When I went out into the sleep world, one of the things I wanted to figure out is where was the break? How come the patient wasn't making it from the sleep doctor to my office? Where did the break occur? What I found out was pretty fascinating. There was no break. The whole process is the broken part. So to understand why you don't get many patients now, you need to understand the sleep process. If you go to any physician and you're there for a physical, or you're there just for a general checkup, they don't screen you for sleep. Why? They weren't taught it. So doctors aren't taught about sleep, they're not going to screen you for sleep. So if patients aren't being screened for sleep, how are they going to make it from a doctor's office to a sleep doctor's office? Specifically, mild to moderate patients, typically they don't complain very much. They may not have that many symptoms. The mild to moderate patients make up the majority of the patients we see. So if we're waiting for a patient to complain, and they don't have any symptoms per se other than snoring, and maybe they're a little tired, but they don't think much about it other than, I didn't sleep well last night, I got to sleep late. You can go to sleep at 12 o'clock and wake up at 6 o'clock, and if you have the right type of sleep, you're going to sleep well. So how is it that a patient comes to you? Typically, patients come to us from a sleep doctor. But who is it and who are these patients we're getting? What have they gone through already to get here? If a patient is lucky enough to get screened for sleep and he gets referred to a sleep doctor, that patient is almost always going to go through a long consult with the sleep doctor. The end result of that consult, regardless of what goes on during it, is you need to have a sleep study. Now back in the day it used to be lab studies. Now it'll most always be a home sleep study. Either way, we're going to study you for sleep and we're going to get the results afterwards. So a patient takes a sleep test home, they sleep with it that night, the sleep study comes back to the office and it gets uploaded. All the information then gets sent over to the sleep doctor via an email. They get an email, you need to interpret this following study. The doctor hopefully looks at the data, looks at the patient history, and then would make a recommendation based on what he saw. If the patient was mild and moderate, you would think that the patient would come to you. This is not reality. Reality is whether the patient's mild, moderate, or severe, the sleep doctor is going to put him on CPAP. Why? That's what he knows. Another reason, if he refers the patient to you, that patient now becomes your patient, not his patient. So there are some sleep doctors out there who get it. But typically, patients don't make it from the sleep doctor to your office because sleep doctors are prescribing CPAP. So, was there a break in any of that? Where was the broken process? The broken part of the process started way back at the beginning because the doctors weren't screening you without bias. They were only sending you over if you had a problem. So, what do we like the process to be? We like every patient to be screened. By the time we're done with our plan here, every doctor in the country is going to hand out a sleep screener to every patient who comes in. That's non-biased screening. Patients who screen positive would be tested. Patients who test positive would then be put into different categories. Mild and moderate go into the dentist, and severes going over to CPAP. When you think about it, and you think about this process, it's really important to understand the players in the world of sleep. So who are the players in the world of sleep? We know we're the dentist. What role do we play now? In non-IAOS world, not very much of a role. We treat patients with oral appliances. Maybe we get some consults here and there. Maybe each sleep lab puts a dentist on staff because they're required to by the AASM. But we're not big players in the world of sleep. The players in the world of sleep typically are the sleep labs, the sleep doctors, and the DME companies. The sleep labs are in it for testing. Private sleep labs, the whole business has almost gone down. It used to be you could open a sleep lab and you were opening a great business. months, reimbursements were $3,000 or $4,000 a night. After home sleep test became the norm for first night and reimbursements got cut all the way down to $700, sleep studies and lab were not so big anymore. But sleep labs still do exist, mostly in hospitals, some private, and they're in it for testing. That's what they want, a full sleep lab. How about a sleep doctor? What does that sleep doctor want? He wants patients to manage. He wants to interpret studies. So he can interpret home studies, he can interpret lab studies, and then he can manage patients with disease. Patients who are on CPAP, they're going to come into him on a regular basis, at least every 3 months. How did they get to CPAP? From the other player in the sleep world, the DME companies. CPAP is a billion-dollar business. ResMed, one of the biggest companies out there, has a little home sleep test that they almost give away just because they're looking for people to use their CPAP. So we're talking about the 3 main players in the world of sleep. Sleep labs, sleep doctors, DME companies. There's 2 crucial components missing there. The dentist being one, and the referring doctors being the other. If we can somehow increase the amount of referrals by getting doctors involved in the process, and if we as dentists can play a big role in this, it's going to create that win-win-win system that we've talked about. Where do you find these patients? Typically, if you go into a primary care office, what's the percentage of that population that's going to test positive for sleep apnea? The answer, 4 to 10%. Roughly about the same percentage you would get if you went into the public library, because that's the same percentage that it is everywhere, 4 to 10%. A primary care office is full of people who aren't necessarily unhealthy. So if you're looking for patients, are we going to primary care offices? Not typically. Where are the patients for the most part? What's the best office for us to go to as a dentist? If we're looking for patients, the number 1 place in terms of highest percentage that will test positive, cardiology. Anywhere from 50 to 80% of the patient population will test positive for sleep apnea. So is that my favorite place to go to? Not necessarily. Every office has got pros and cons. So while there may be 50 to 80% of those patients who test positive in a cardiology office, about 80% or higher are going to test severe, making them candidates for a CPAP, meaning they're not going to be patients for us. In addition, at least 80% of them have Medicare, meaning the reimbursements are going to be lower than that of an out-of-network PPO. Where else can we go for sleep patients? My personal favorites, 2 of them, internal medicine and pain management. Internal medicine offices have about a 30 to 35% positive rate, and 65% of those patients will test mild to moderate. In addition, we're talking about a lot of patients with PPOs. That's where we get all the higher reimbursements from. An average reimbursement across the country now is probably $1,500. Dental Sleep Masters, IAOS reimbursement is roughly 3 times that. $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 and up. Our best reimbursed guys are getting about $10,000, $11,000 each. You'll get most of those patients from internal med offices and pain management. Pain management offices have roughly 40% of their population in need of a sleep test. Patients who are on narcotics typically get induced sleep apnea. Just because the narcotics brought it on does not mean it does not need to be treated. We're going to see a lot of people out of pain management offices. We're going to see our share of PPOs. We're also going to see our share of workers' comp. The right workers' comp policy can be a really good reimbursed. So why aren't people going there? Why aren't people looking at the internal med offices, the cardiology offices, the pain management, the endocrinology, which has also about a 30 to 40% positive screen rate, rheumatology, which probably has a 20 to 25% screen rate? Those doctors don't necessarily know sleep. They weren't trained in it. It certainly is not part of the specialty training. It is part of the pulmonary specialty training, hence they do it. It's not part of the other ones, even though all the patients are sitting in their waiting room. What does everyone who has sleep apnea have in common? I'll give you 2 things. Number 1, they all snore. Number two, at some point in their life, they end up in the cardiology office. It's a given. What we're going to teach you how to do is how to go to those offices and set those offices up with the proper screening programs. Set those offices up so every patient is screened in those offices. Set those patients up so each one of them who tests positive gets treated. If they're mild and moderate, they're going to come right to your office, right to your dental office. Imagine that. A mild and moderate patient comes straight to you, bypassing the sleep doc. If they're severe, we're going to send them to the sleep doc. Why can we do this? What is it about this that allows us to do this? We're pretty serious about it. If our patients are tested after 6 months of wearing an oral appliance and they're not showing either compliance or successful treatment, we're referring them over to the sleep doc. I am, however, going to hold the sleep doc to the same exact standards. If he's treating a patient on CPAP and they're not successful after 6 months, they're sending them to me. So because we're so serious and our follow-up is so diligent, we're able to say mild and moderate are going to come to us first, severe are going to go to the sleep doc first, because that's where we think that they're going to each have the most success. If they're not successful, we're going to go ahead and put them on the other